The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Chaf Cheshm, 20 days in the month of Cheshm, which is the Yom HaLedes, the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. And it's of special significance this year because this year, Chaf Cheshm, besides being the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, it also is the 100th year of the passing of the Rebbe Maharash, who was the Rebbe Rashab's father. So the one who continued leadership, Yisiyus, after the Rebbe Maharash, was the Rebbe Rashab, his son. As the Rebbe referred to the expression of the pasuk, that referred to a pasuk, V'holach Hashemesh u'bo Hashemesh. In other words, after the sunset of the Rebbe Maharash, the sun rose again with the leadership of his son of the Rebbe Nishmas Hayes. So today's birthday is the birthday of the Rebbe Maharash's son, the one who took over leadership after the Rebbe Maharash, and this is the year of the 100th year of the passing away of the Rebbe Maharash. In addition to that, the Rebbe also stressed, Chaf Cheshm this year falls out to be on a Shabbos. And the Rebbe explained that Tishrei is always Molei. In other words, there are certain months in the year that are 29 days. There are certain months that are always 29. There are some months that are always 30. And there are some months that could be either 29 or 30. Tishrei, the month of Tishrei, is always Molei with 30 days. If Tishrei is Molei, Chaf Cheshm, the 20 days in the month of Cheshm, always, the Rebbe continues, falls out on the same day as Rosh Hashanah. Whatever day Rosh Hashanah will fall out, like for instance this year Rosh Hashanah fell out to be on a Shabbos, and if Rosh Hashanah is on a Shabbos, which this is the opening of Tishrei, the closing of Tishrei is also on a Shabbos, which is Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres always has to fall out the same day as Rosh Hashanah, and whatever day Rosh Hashanah and Shmini Atzeres falls out, Chaf Cheshm will always be on the same day. So this year, Chaf Cheshm is on a Shabbos. And as explained in previous Farbrengen, the Rebbe stressed, the greatness of Rosh Hashanah that falls out to be in Shabbos, and as the Gemara says, the Negea Korbanos, that when Inyonim get together on a certain day, it helps the Negea all of the Inyonim that come out on this day. The the fact that Chaf Cheshm is on a Shabbos also makes it a different type of a Chaf Cheshm. In other words, it elevates the Chaf Cheshm as well. It puts it into a different category as if it would have been on any other days of the week. The Rebbe added, naturally we know that Rosh Hashanah is Loi Adu Rosh. Rosh Hashanah cannot fall out either on a Sunday or Wednesday or Friday, the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So naturally the same is with Chaf Cheshm as well. However, there are other weekdays which Rosh Hashanah can fall out, and then Chaf Cheshm will be on different weekdays. So this year, we have this advantage that Chaf Cheshm is not on any weekday, but it has the elevation of being on a Shabbos. And together with it, as previously mentioned, it also has the great inyan of this year being 100 years from the passing away of the Rebbe Maharash. And as the Rebbe explained, that quoted as Zohar. The Zohar stresses the greatness of number 100. Normally, the Rebbe says, we find in Chassidus the greatness of number 10. 10 is a certain kind of a completion. It's a level of completion when we reach to number 10. And that is why we find in Chassidus stress on several very famous inyanim with number 10, primarily Aseres Hadibres, which consists of 10. Asera Ma'amores, the 10 sayings, 10 quotations that the Rebbe created the world with, which also consists of 10. The Rebbe added on, there's another inyan which consists of 10, and he said, it could be said that the third inyan, which consists of 10, is yet higher than the first two inyanim. What is the third inyan that consists of 10? The Rebbe said at the end of Sefer Tehillim, there are 10 expressions, Hallelujah. Hallelujah is mentioned 10 times at the end of Sefer Tehillim. What's the pshat Hallelujah? Hallelujah is the praise of the Yid to the Eibishter. And the praise of the Yid to the Eibishter is that powerful and so chashiv that it supersedes the chsidus of Asara Mamoris, or even Aseret HaDibros, which we know how great and outstanding these two inyanim are. However, when we're talking about the koyach of the youth to praise the Rebbe, this is even more outstanding. So this is the negaya, the number of 10. How great the number of 10 is. How much greater so is it when we come to the number of 100, which is, as stressed in Chassidus, 10 times 10. This is, as Chassidus stresses, a very high level of shleimus. And this is the year when we are celebrating 100 years of passing away of the Rebbe Maras. His son, the Rebbe Nishma Seiden. So in general, the Rebbe said, by each and every neshama that is born in this world, by everyone bringing down a neshama into this world, this brings closer the coming of Mashiach. And the Rebbe refers to the Gemara, Ein ben David ba, at sheyichla kol neshama shebeguf, that the coming of Mashiach depends until all the neshamas will be taken out of guf. What does guf mean? The Rebbe refers to a Tosfos. The Tosfos comments, what means guf? The oitza ha-neshamas, l'mayla is titled guf. So, in general, by each and every neshama coming down into this world, this brings a step closer to the coming of Mashiach. How much more so is it when we are talking about a neshama that came down on this day, on the day of the 20th of Cheshvan, when we're talking about the neshama of the Rebbe Rashab. How much closer did this bring to the coming of Mashiach? Particularly because the Rebbe Rashab stressed very strongly the whole idea of Afotos Mayonis, and to bring the Mayonis of Chassidus into Chutzah. And this is something which he fulfilled fully. And more than that, the Rebbe says, it is very hard, the Rebbe used the expression, for people on our level to go ahead and evaluate differences between one Rebbe and the other. How can we come to point out what one Rebbe excelled over another Rebbe? But the Rebbe says this is so obvious, and besides, the Rebbe referred to a saying from the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab once said, Tanya is the most precious sefer in Chassidus, it's a perish of Chassidus. So it seems like the discussion was about one saying his own pshatim in Tanya. So Rebbe Rashab said, on one hand, everything is so accurate in Tanya, how can we dare say our own pshatim in Tanya? But on the other hand, the Rebbe Rashab concluded, being that these pshatim that we are saying will only lead to an increase in Avodas Hashem, then it doesn't matter. Same the Rebbe says, being that us drawing these differences between the Rabbeim is not just a theoretical matter. We are doing it in order that we should come to some sort of a conclusion which will bring about an increase in Avodas Hashem. That's why the Rebbe says he thinks it may be appropriate to allow himself to point out how the Rebbe Rashab excelled, in what way he stood out as opposed to all other Rabbeim. And this is primarily, the Rebbe said, the Rebbe Rashab was the one that founded Yeshiva Simchat Minim. What was the introduction of what Simchat Minim introduced is the fact of learning Nigla and Chassidus in a format of a Seder Yeshiva. Until the foundation of Simchat Minim, naturally Chassidus was learned. However, it wasn't in such a kvius, in such a way as it is in the learning, a part of the curriculum, as it is after Yeshiva Simchat Minim was founded. After the founding of Simchat Minim, it just like the Yeshiva requirements requires the learning of Nigla, requires the learning of Gemara and Poskim and so forth, there is an equal requirement to learn Pnimi Satira, to learn Chassidus. And this is something which prior to the Rebbe Nishma Seiden's founding, Simchat Minim did not exist. In fact, this is why he named the Yeshiva Simchat Minim, because Minim means one who is full, complete from both parts of Torah, the part of Nigla the Torah, as well as the part of Pnimi Satira. Rebbe also added on, when did this major event take place? It took place at the celebration of Sheva Brachas from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It was at the Frierdiker Rebbe Sheva Brachas. That is when his father, the Rebbe Rashab, founded Yeshiva Simchat Minim in the year of Tafresh Nun Zayin. Therefore, the Rebbe went on, so this is what the Rebbe Nishma Seiden introduced, is something completely new and unique, which until those days did not exist, that a Yeshiva Bacha should have in his schedule. Just as important it is for him to learn the Chelik of Nigla the Torah, he combined the same stress for the learning of Pnimi Satira. And this is something which was introduced by the Rebbe Rashab. Based on what the Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya, that a davar shebekdusha lo yizov mim kaima, that any heilig gezach, any davar shebekdusha remains eternal and can never be erased or never be removed. The Rebbe says, therefore, this applies to all those who were Talmidim in Temchet Minim, and not taking into consideration whether they were Talmidim for a longer time, for a longer period of time, or even for a shorter period of time, being that they were fortunate to taste the fact of being a Talmud in Temchet Minim, so this will always remain with them. And the Mele the Rebbe says this is an appropriate day for everyone to make, for everyone who once learned in Temchet Minim, and has a shaykhus to this schedule of combining Nigla and Chsidus. It's an appropriate day to make a proper Cheshbon Nefesh where one is standing. And the most proper day to utilize for this is this day, the day of Chav Cheshvan, the day when the Rebbe Rashab was born. And particularly again, being that Chav Cheshvan falls out to be on a Shabbos. The Rebbe here stressed what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Geras HaKodesh. The Negeya Arichus, and it's also written in the writings of the Rebbe Rashab, the Negeya Arichos and Tvila, to spend more time in davening for people who are Balayasik and are busy all week, and simply their schedule does not allow them that they should be able to spend much time in davening. When is the appropriate time for them to daven Ba'arichos? It is on Shabbos. So Manela, we see from this that Shabbos is a proper time when one who's as busy as he can be all week can get himself involved into an Indian Ruchni, and at the same time make a proper Cheshbon Nefesh worthy standing, and taking into consideration that he is a person that was fortunate to be a Talmud in Temchet Minim, and to be a Talmud in this Moished which combined Nigla and Chsidus in a format that it became a Tzviyut B'Nefesh. It became part of him, not only in a daily routine, it became not as part of him to learn both Chalakim and Torah, the Chalik of Nigla the Torah as well as the Chalik of Tzviyut Torah. Today is a proper day for one to calculate and make a proper evaluation on himself. How is he standing as far as the requirements of the Rebbe Rashab, whose birthday is today? And the Rebbe stressed that when we're making these calculations and these cheshbon nefesh with oneself, it's not that it should just be left in theory, but everything has to come down l'poil. And the Rebbe again referred here to the famous story which you've heard in previous Farbrengen, that the Rebbe Maharaj, and who was the son of the Tzemach Tzedek, in the year Tov Reish Ches, there was a case. In other words, that was a year when previous Sforim had calculated that Mashiach would be coming that year. And on that year, the Lekutei Torah, which is the Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe and Chamasim of Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, was printed the first time. So the story goes that the Rebbe Maharaj once came into his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, and asked him, Tov Reish Ches, there is a case on Tov Reish Ches, so where is Mashiach? So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, aren't you happy? Isn't it enough that this year the Lekutei Torah was printed? In other words, the Tzemach Tzedek took the idea of the fact that the Lekutei Torah was printed, which is a tremendous forwardness in Hafashas HaMayon. In those days there weren't as many Hasidus Sforim printed as today. This may have been the third or fourth Hasidus Sefer printed. The Tanya, the Torah, and probably Lekutei Torah. I don't think there was anything else by that time. And the Tzemach Tzedek was the one who edited the Lekutei Torah. It's Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, from his grandfather, but who prepared him to print, it was the Tzemach Tzedek who did. So the Tzemach Tzedek invested quite a bit of time and effort to see to it that the Lekutei Torah should be published, and therefore he was extremely proud of the publication of the Lekutei Torah. And especially the way he looked at it, the Tzemach Tzedek said, so here we have a meaning which, the way the Tzemach Tzedek looked at it, he told him, is it of Venus? In other words, why aren't you satisfied with this? So the Rebbe Maharaj responded to him, no, Tata. This is not enough. We need Mashiach to poil. We need Mashiach in a reality. The fact that the Lekutei Torah was printed is insufficient. Same thing the Rebbe says, when there are all kinds of calculations which we make, and all kinds of cheshbonos which we make, everything has to be brought down into action. And managed into young and mighty, and to bring it down, how mighty, who are an increase in all in young, to the good that could come about as a result of proper calculation of this day of Chav Ches, 20 days in the month of Ches. Then the Rebbe went on that the Nigeria today is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, as just explained, and on what, and today we are entering the 123rd year of the birth of the Rebbe Rashab. And here the Rebbe refers to something which is written in the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that after the Rebbe, his father, the Rebbe Rashab, passed away, and he was already on the Olam Ha'emet, and it came Chav Chesed, his birthday, the Frierdiker Rebbe heard a mimer which his father, the Rebbe Rashab, said Yemaila on the pasuk of the new capital which he is entering, had he still been living in this world. Whenever the Rebbe says being so we must say that there has a cycle even now as well to this capital, to the capital Kuf Chav Gimel, 123rd capital. In many Purim, prior to every capital, there's a little introduction of what this capital is about. The Rebbe says it seems that these introductions are fairly authentic. As an introduction to capital Kuf Chav Gimel, which is Sir Amalei, a lecha notesias einai hayotze b'shamayim, to you I'm raising my eyes to the one sitting in Shamayim. Rebbe says, the introduction to this capital is that we are complaining on the length of Golus. In other words, this is a display of Gewalt, as the Rebbe used the expression, on the duration of the Golus. And that is why we begin the capital, Eilecha Nofosiyas Einai. We are raising our eyes. The Rebbe says normally a person can go through quite a period of time without raising his eyes. He could be involved in learning, could be involved in learning Nigla and learning again, fulfilling mitzvahs, and his eyes will not be raised. However, when the capital uses the expression, Eilecha Nofosiyas Einai, I'm raising my eyes, that the fact a person is going out of his regular routine. In other words, the Golus, the length and the duration of the Golus is forcing us into such a position that we have to raise our eyes. Something which normally we have not been doing, but here we are raising our eyes to whom? To the Rebbeinu Shalom, complaining why the Golus is lasting so long. And as he goes on at the end of the capital, Rabba Soval on Asenu, we are already full with our suffering. Halag Hasananim, Habuz Ligayonim. In other words, we've been put to shame and to embarrassment throughout all these years of Golus, and we are asking and begging the Rebbe that the Rebbe should take an end to this Golus. So this is what the content of the new capital of the Rebbe Rashab is about, something very actual. It's a tefillah that we are begging the Rebbe that the Rebbe should make an end to the Golus. Where do we find something significant in the number of 123? Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen lived for 123 years. Where is this whole Indian discussed? This is interesting. The Indian has a shaykhus to Hilchas Chanukah. What shaykhus? The Rambam in Hilchas Chanukah discusses the Indian of Hallel. Actually, Rebbe says, it's surprising why the Rambam, we know everything is extremely accurate, why the Rambam discusses Hilchas Hallel in Hanukkah and not in Hilchas Yontef. Hallel we don't say only on Hanukkah, we say Hallel on Yontef as well. Hilchas Yontef come prior to Hilchas Hanukkah. Still in Hilchas Yontef, the Rambam does not get involved discussing Hallel. Where does the Rambam really discuss Hallel? It is in Hilchas Hanukkah, for whatever reason. And in Hilchas Hanukkah, where the Rambam discusses Hallel, the Rambam refers at length to Hallel. You have a sit on this? Thank you. And the Rambam there discusses that when Hallel was recited, Hallel has the expression of 123 times Hallelujah. Praise to the Eibishter. The word Hallel or Hallelujah is mentioned 123 times. This is Monach, what? 123. Kineged Sneisach Shalom. Aaron HaKohen lived 123 years. What is the source of this Rambam? Rebbe says it's in Yerushalmi. In Bavli there's no mention of this. However, in Yerushalmi it is mentioned that this simon, that Hallel has 123 times Hallelujah, and it coincides with Aaron HaKohen who lived for 123 years. If you look into the figure right before the beginning of Hallel, this is the writing of the Alter Rebbe, there's a little brief halachic introduction. When are the days that we complete Hallel? And it is the 2 days of Pesach, 2 days of Shavuot, 9 days of Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret, and 8 days of Hanukkah. These are days that we complete Hallel. The Siman, what is the Siman to refer to this? Dibetach. Days, Test, and Ches. Days and days for the 2 days of Pesach, the 2 days of Shavuot, 9 days of Sukkot, and 8 days of Hanukkah. The Rebbe says, when words are composed for Simanim, it's not just some words. The word Dibetach also has some sort of a scientific here. Betach stems from the word Betachim, hope. So that's why it's not some Siman which was created, a composition of 4 letters, which has a Taichas to Hallel. It's a composition which puts together the word of Betachim. It again shows us the greatness of Hallel. And the Vayera, Sneisach Shel Aaron HaKohen lived 123 years. And here the Rebbe went on to explain the greatness of Aaron. Aaron's name was Oyev Sabriyah Umekarv HaMotorah. This was Pesach of told. Aaron expressed love to everyone. What's expressed to everyone? So Chassidus stresses every word in the Mishnah is accurate. Why does the Mishnah use the expression Oyev Sabriyah? He liked, whom did he like? Briyah, those that were created. Mishnah could use the expression Oyev Nosim, Oyev Yehudim, Oyev. He liked people. Why is it expressed in the word Briyah? The Rebbe went on to explain based on what the Rebbe explains in Chassidus. Briyah means a person who was created by the Eibishter but has no other plus within himself, only the fact that he's created by the Eibishter. In other words, he does not possess any other qualifications, any other advantages, there's no other reason. There was no other reason for Aaron to love this person other than the fact that he was created by the Eibishter. So the Mishnah tells us that even to such a person, Aaron also expressed love. In other words, if a person would have his qualifications, then why am I admiring this person? Why am I loving this person? It's because of his intellect, or because of his good deeds, or because of other type of characteristics which the person has. However, Aaron expressed love to people who are in no other category, only than Briyah. And to these people, Umekarv HaMotorah. The Rebbe stressed there are many ways how we can approach a person. Especially when we're talking about people who their only classification and their only advantage is that they are Briyah. In other words, they have no other pluses within themselves. So there is one way that you can slice the Torah out to them and make the Torah appropriate to them. In other words, we will familiarize them with certain mitzvahs, yes, and with certain mitzvahs not. Aaron did not do that. The attitude of Aaron HaKohen was, Oyev Sabriyah, he expressed love to these people. However, it wasn't just a mere love. It was a love which brought about an action right away. It brought about an action of bringing them close to Torah and not the Torah close to them. What's it called, not the Torah close to them? In other words, Aaron did not custom design the Torah to each and every person. On the contrary, he was Mekar of each and every person. And each and every person, what was the result of Aaron being the Mekar, that this person could customize himself to adjust himself to the requirements of Torah. And again, here the Rebbe stressed very much here, and again later in the Farbrengen, what the Rebbe has been talking recently, the great importance of Avas Yisrael, of love to each and every Yid, no matter what type of category the person is, as long as he is a Yid just like we derived the lesson from Aaron. He may be only a Bria. He has no other advantages. Still, we are supposed to express love to this person as well, and not just to stop with expressing the love, and that should be it. We love him without bringing about any type of action, but just like by Aaron, it was Oyeves Abriyos, and at the same time, it carved on the Torah. It comes in one. If we have love to a Yid, we have to right away make sure to be Mekarev this Yid to Torah. Then the Rebbe kept on stressing in today's Farbrengen, and the previous Farbrengen, and later in this Farbrengen, this afternoon, the importance not only of Ahavas Yisrael, of love to each and every Yid, but the Rebbe demanding from us now a yet higher Madrega Achdus Yisrael, which means the unity of all of Yidden together, which is obviously a deeper expression of Ahavas Yisrael. It is expressed in the format of Achdus Yisrael, of uniting all Yidden at one together. The Rebbe spoke about that all these actions, which he also calls for the union of Afatas HaMayonos, bringing the world of Chassidus, that they should also reach to the Chutzah, to the outside. And here the Rebbe says we do not only take a little bit of Chassidus, but we take the Mayon, which is the source of Chassidus, the well itself, and we take this well and we bring it to the Chutzah. All this to bring about the coming of Mashiach. And the Rebbe said it's interesting that it is a halacha in Rambam, where the Rambam describes that we are obligated to hope for the coming of Mashiach. He says, perfectly Yidden know it from davening. In davening, we constantly keep on stressing how we are begging for the coming of Mashiach. But those that don't want to satisfy themselves just with knowing it from davening, they are more advanced than Lumdus, and therefore they are looking for a Lumdus source. Where do we find that we have to constantly hope for the coming of Mashiach? The Rebbe says it's a Rambam. And the Rambam uses the expression, Lo nis'avu chachonim u'neviim liyamois HaMashiach. That the chachonim and the neviim, in other words, the Rambam is talking about people who can be classified as chachonim and as neviim, that they had a tremendous desire to the coming of Mashiach. So if they, who are classified as chachonim and neviim, have to have this strong desire to the coming of Mashiach, it is naturally that simple people, unless in Ke'arkeinu, positive people definitely have to live with a constant taiva, with a constant shukah, an inner desire to bring about the coming of Mashiach. And this whole inyan, the Rebbe says, referring back to the inyan of Hallel, is discussed in what part of the Rambam? In the Rambam of Hilchos Chanukah. What is the inyan of Chanukah? Chanukah is Meloshin, very outstanding. Chanukah is Meloshin Chinuch, calls for education. And the Rebbe keeps on stressing education applies not only to young, it applies to older as well. Education applies to everyone. Everyone needs chinuch. Particularly by Chanukah we find that the whole idea of Chanukah is not that the lichtigkeit should remain within, but the lichtigkeit should go to the outside, as the Gemara uses the expression, that where do we have to light the candles, the Chanukah candles? We have to light them al Pesach Beitei Nibachut, at the doorpost. However, the doorpost facing towards the outside, and the Gemara uses the expression, Gemara Masechta Shabbos, and the Gemara discusses when is the time we can light Chanukah candles. The Gemara uses the expression Mishetishka HaChama Ad Dekalya Rigla de Tormedoi. That's what the Gemara says. Pesach Pshat means from sunset until the Tormedoi will not be walking the streets anymore. What does that mean? So Rashi says that Tormedoi is the name of a tribe, the name of a group of people. And these people used to walk the streets very late. So what's the manner that walk of Chanukah? From Kishka HaChama, from the sunset, until these people stop walking the streets. That's the perfect shot. Chassidus type is a much deeper type. Talmud is spelled Tov, Reis, Mem, Vav, Dalet. It has the same word as a moired. Moired means one who rebels. What's the idea of Chanukah? The idea of Chanukah is to bring light, the light of Torah. And this light should reach so far that it could destroy totally the one who is rebelling in Yiddishkeit. And here the Rebbe stressed today very strongly, even the footsteps of this person should also be destroyed. Kalya, not only the intellect of the person or the entire being of the person, but this whole concept of moired, the whole concept of rebelling in Gettlichkeit should be totally erased. This is the whole idea of Hanukkah. And the same, it reflects the idea of Hanukkah, which is Hanukkah Sabayis. And here the Rebbe says we find various mamorim from the Rabbeim, which were also said at the beginning of Mizmor Shir Hanukkah Sabayis. Not only they said these mamorim on Hanukkah, but they also said these mamorim at various occasions of Hanukkah Sabayis. A dedication of the shul. The Rebbe said it's even found that the Alter Rebbe said a minor with the beginning of Mizmor Shir Hanukkah Sabayis at a dedication of a home. Because the home is actually also based on mitzvah. It is a mitzvah ma'at. And this is what every Jewish home stands for, this same idea. Every Jewish home has to bring about this force to bring lichtigkeit, not only within the inside of the home, but in the entire surroundings, even on the outskirts. Pesach Beisim Ibachot, and to such an extent that the whole idea of a moired, of one who rebels in Gettlichkeit, one who rebels in Kedusha, should be totally erased. As the Gemara uses the expression, the Kalya Rigla de Talmudai, even the footsteps of this moired should also be totally erased and not be in existence any longer. After speaking all these inyanim, as we see the Rebbe was talking over this as a continuation to today being the Yom HaLedes, the birthday of the Rebbe Nishmas Haydn, the Rebbe said it would be very proper to discuss an inyan in Migla that has a shaykhus to Hasidus as well, and also has a shaykhus to this birthday of the Rebbe Nishmas Haydn. And the Rebbe spoke in the following inyan. Briefly, the Rebbe referred there as an inyan of Meshicha. Meshicha means that the Dinah Yisrael, and it's discussed in the Rambam in Hilchot Malachim, when a new king is appointed, he had to be anointed with a special oil. There's a special oil, as the Rambam described, there was Malchei Yehuda used one oil, Malchei Yisrael used a different oil, and this oil was a Shemen HaMischa on the king who was just appointed. However, there are certain exceptions for certain kings which did not require the ointment. For example, the Gemara, and this Gemara is mentioned in the Rambam. The Rambam quotes it Lahalacha. Rambam quotes one whose father was already a king, and there are no older brothers who are arguing his being appointed as a king. This melech does also not require Messiah. Rebbe said, obviously when we're talking about leadership of a person like the Rebbe Rashab, Rebbe Nishmas Haydn, falls into the same category as a melech, and therefore it's very appropriate to find the same idea of Messiah, just like a king had to be anointed, the same idea the Negeya, the Rebbe Nishmas Haydn, the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe explained just as we find the Negeya in Moshe Rabbeinu. The Medrash tells us based on the pasuk of Moshe Hoya Roya. And the Medrash says that Moshe was, the psak Hoya Roya, he was a shepherd. In other words, as soon as Moshe Rabbeinu came out, it was immediately noticed within him that he possessed leadership qualifications. He had qualifications to be the Roya Yisrael. He was a Reyes Tain, and while he was a Reyes Tain, it was already noticeable within him that he possessed the proper qualifications for one to be a Reyes Yisrael. Same thing when I was talking about Reyes Yisrael, Yisrael Yisrael, the Rebbe Nishmas Haydn, the Rebbe Rashab, same meaning comes about, the Rebbe says, comes to our mind that we have to find where is the meaning of Mishticha, the Negeya, the Rebbe Rashab. In other words, where there is deed, a special deed committed, which expresses his being appointed as a melech, as a Nasi Yisrael. The Rebbe looked back if we find, as we just discussed, that the Rebbe Rashab took over leadership from his father, the Rebbe Marat, 100 years ago. Rebbe Marat passed away Tafresh Mem Gimel, Yud Gimel Tishrei, 13 days in the month of Tishrei. And leadership
Obviously, he accepted right away. Why? Because what's the sign of acceptance of leadership by a Nazi Yisrael, by a Nazi Chabad? The acceptance is shown the same Chassidus. And we find, same Amorim Chassidus, and we find that immediately after the passing away of his father, the Rebbe Maharaj, his son, the Rebbe Messiah, said Amorim Chassidus, something which prior to that, in other words, the meaning of saying Amorim is something which belongs to a Rebbe. So he immediately began doing this. After the passing of his father, this shows that that is when he accepted his leadership. However, the Rebbe says we find in the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe that for whatever reason, it was not until Kaf Reish Nun Daled, which is 11 years later, that the Rebbe Rashab began standing in the same place as his father, the Rebbe Maharaj, did by the davening. In other words, for the first 11 years of his leadership, the school was the same Betamedrash in the city of Lubavitch, in the circle of Lubavitch. However, for the first 11 years of his leadership, he did not go close and daven on the same spot which his father davened. It was only after 11 years that he did that. So obviously the Rebbe began thinking in today's Farbrengen, doesn't this show us that for the first 11 years, there was some sort, his leadership was not in the fullest, to the fullest measure. But because it is not so. Obviously, the reason why he did not daven at the place that his father did is the Rebbe Rashab had an older brother, known by Hasidim as the Razor, abbreviate Reb Zalman Ar. Rebbe says it's known, the great qualifications which this Reb Zalman Ar possessed, and the great honor which was given to him by the Frierdiker Rebbe, as well as by his younger brother, the Rebbe Rashab, who accepted leadership. And the Reb Zalman Aaron did not accept leadership. He did not become a Rebbe. So obviously it was some sign of respect for his brother, where he expressed that for the first 11 years he did not take over the same place which his father, the Rebbe Maharaj, used for davening. However, the Rebbe said something more than that. Let us look at the beginning of the first Maimah which the Rebbe Rashab said. Yud Gimel Tishrei, his father passed away. So out in Halacha, Shiva did not last long. Yud Gimel Tishrei is the day before Sukkot. Sukkot breaks Shiva. So his Shiva lasted like a day and a half, or whatever. So, Yom Tov of Sukkot, it was already after Shiva. That was the beginning of the Maimah, which was the very first Maimah that Rebbe Rashab said after the passing of his father. So the Rebbe says it's a remarkable thing. The Maimah begins with the word, Keser Yitnu Lecha. A crown will be given upon you. Keser Yitnu Lecha, we say every Shabbos and Musaf. So you do not have to look too far. This is the most appropriate end, which has a cycle to the appointing of the Nazi Yisrael. Here we have the most appropriate word. Keser Yitnu Lecha, a crown will be given upon you. When did this happen? Immediately after he took over. Immediately as he took over Nasiya. His father passed away on the Gimel Tishrei, and which was the very first Maimah which, as it recorded, noted, that this was said on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is only a few days later. He said a Maimah that begins with these words, Keser Yitnu Lecha. It just shows how everything is extremely accurate and extremely appropriate. And the Negea, this is also an union of a Melech Yisrael, a Nazi Yisrael, and the Mesicha, which in the times of the Beit HaMikdash was done with special oil which Malchus David had, as opposed to a special oil which Malchus Yisrael had. In later generations, by Messiah Yisrael, it's expressed in a different way, and in this particular way, by the Rebbe Rashab, it was expressed by himself saying the Maimah that began with the word Keser Yitnu Lecha. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe went on, usual, to learn a Rashi in this week's Chazarah.
And Rashi does not comment anything on it. And based on the cloud that in Yonah Shel Rashi is to be Mefarish Pshuta Shel Mikra, wherever there's something not understood in Pshat, Rashi explains it. So Mamela, this is something which requires an explanation why Rashi does not explain it. However, let us first learn the Rashi, which the Rebbe did explain. And the Rebbe said the reason he selected to learn this particular Rashi is also for a reason that this Rashi has a tremendous lesson in the union of Avas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, which is spoken about previously. The Rashi is on the first pasuk of Kapitel Chof Aleph. Kapitel Chof Aleph begins with the words Vashem Pokad Esorah. Hashem remembered Sarah, and Sarah became pregnant. Kansher Omar. Vayas Hashem LeSarah, and Hashem did to Sarah Kansher Diber, as he has said. If we look into Rashi, Rashi quotes Vashem Pokad Esorah V'Goyma. In other words, Rashi says, well, we immediately see some sort of an indication that this Pirush, which Rashi is going to say now, does not only apply to these words that Rashi quotes from the pasuk Vashem Pokad Esorah, but it also applies to the latter part of the pasuk, which Rashi does not quote, but just refers to by quoting the words V'Goyma. In other words, it pertains to the entire pasuk. What does Rashi tell us here? Somach Parsha Zu. What shaykhs does this Parsha have here? Prior to this, we read about Avram coming to Avimelech and the problem which Avram had with Avimelech, with Sarah. So Rashi tells us, Somach Parsha Zu Lelamdach. This Parsha puts close to the previous Parsha. It comes to tell us, Shekol HaMevakesh Rachmim Al Chaveirot. Anyone that begs Rachmim, that begs for mercy on his friend, V'hu Tzorich La'osei Davar, and this particular person also has to come on to be helped in this same matter. However, he's begging Rachmim for his friend, Hu Nena Tchila. Hashem rewards him that he's being responded to first. Shenema Vayispalel. Prior to that, we have a pasuk Yud Zayin of Kapitel Chav. Vayispalel Avram El Elokim. Avram prayed to the Rebishter, and the Rebishter healed Avimelech v'es Ishtei v'amoisav. Vayileidu, and they gave birth. So being that Avram needed help in this same matter. Avram did not have children until this age, Avram and Sarah. And Avram went out and was mispalel for whom? For Avimelech. So the Rebishter rewarded Avram that Nena Tchila. He was responded to first. Shenema Vayispalel, V'samach Lei, and right after that it is mentioned, Vashem Pokad Esorah. Shepokta Kvar Koidem Sheripas Avimelech. Prior to healing Avimelech, the Rebishter responded to Sarah. What means Vashem Pokad Esorah? Kansher Omar, Rashi teaches it means Behiroyin, she became pregnant. Kansher Diber, Beleda, means that the actuality that Yitzchak was born. So the Rebbe asked several questions. First of all, as mentioned earlier, why does Rashi have to come on to quote the V'Goyma? What importance is there in the latter part of the pasuk that Rashi has to mention? Secondly, Rebbe is asking, why is Rashi is troubled here, why this pasuk belongs here? Naturally, this is where the pasuk belongs. If we look into the sequence of how in Yonim transpired, how in Yonim took place, here is where the Torah is up to telling us that the Rebbeishter promised and helped Avram and Sarah, and they were blessed with a child. They were given this gift min hashamayim. This is the place where it belongs. Rashi makes the whole chapter, being that Avram was mispalel for Avimelech, and Kol HaMevakesh, whoever begs mercy for his friend and he himself has to be helped in the same matter, is responded first. That is why the Parsha comes here. The Parsha comes here because this is the place of the Parsha. This is where this Parsha, this is the sequence of how Inyanim are taking place. If we go back to the beginning of Vayera, we will read that the Malachim came, several Malachim came. Why did all these Malachim come? For each one had a separate mission. What was the mission of one of them? To discuss, to promise Abraham and Sarah that they will be blessed with a child. So why does Rashi, so as a continuation to that, this Parsha comes, why does Rashi make a whole issue? What's the cycle of this Parsha here? Rebbe explained as follows. We find many times in the Torah that the child who is learning some Chumash Bereshit will notice that the Torah discusses one inyan, refers and closes the inyan, then gets back to one of the previous inyanim and discusses it at length. Rebbe says we will find it at the end of Parshas Bereshit. The end of Parshas Bereshit. The Pasuk wants to finish. So the Torah mentions briefly that the people in Noah's generation sinned and the Rebbe wanted to punish them, but it's mentioned very brief. And this closes the Asara Deiros, the 10 generations. Then we come to the beginning of Parshas Noach. The Torah begins again telling in detail all the details of the Mabul and of Noach and so forth. Same thing, the Torah told us here about the Malachim that came to visit Avraham Avinu. And the Torah told us briefly about them. The mission each and every one of them had. In the middle, we got involved with the holding of Avimelech. Actually, this Hashem Poked of Torah Karshe Omer, Vayas Hashem Lo Torah Karshe Diber, could have been discussed without the introduction of the Inyan of Avimelech. Why did the whole story, the whole episode of Avram and Sarah and Avimelech come in here as an introduction? And remember, this is the place, in this Chazarah and Parshas Vayera, this is where it belongs, that we are to be told that Hashem fulfilled and gave a gift to Avram and Sarah, gave him a child. However, the question is, where in Parshas Vayera? Being that the Torah instilled here this whole union of Avimelech and Sarah, so this comes to stress the fact that when one prays, when one is misfollowed on behalf of the interest of his friend, at the time he himself has to come on to the same thing, he's not a tchila, he's responded to first. And here the Rebbe says, we see how great and outstanding the Ian of Abbas Yisrael is. We know Medina Torah, when is one obligated to be misfollowed? The Rambam tells us that the obligation of tefillah, min ha-Torah, is when a person has a special requirement, when one is lacking something, and he wants the Rebbe should give it to him. That is when we are supposed to be misfollowed to no other than to Hashem. That is the original obligation of tefillah min ha-Torah. So when one is at tzarich lo oisei davar, when one is in need of something, naturally what should he do? Al pi Torah. According to Torah, what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to be misfollowed to the Rebbe for this thing. In fact, we know Al pi Torah. Torah tells us, and the Rebbe says it's quoted in the Tanya, Chayecha koydem, that it's a question of preferring yourself above somebody else. Chayecha koydem, your life is before your friend's life. So one will say to himself, he is lacking something, he has to be gehol from me, he wants Hashem should help him in a certain inyan. Why should he be misfollowed for his friend? Al pi din and al pi Torah. He's supposed to be misfollowed to the Rebbe, that the Rebbe should help him in this particular inyan that he needs help in. Here we see by Avraham Avinu, Avraham shows us the lesson. What proper Ahavas Yisrael is. Though he was a tzarich lo isei davar, he had to come on to this same matter. He needed help. And it was for many years that the Rebbe has promised him that the Rebbe will help him. The Rebbe referred to a further Rashi in this pasuk. The pasuk uses the expression here, kan shel omar and kan shel diber, which actually refers to both sayings of the Rebbe. When did the Rebbe promise Avraham Avinu that he will bench him with children? Dibur, Rashi says, was by the Bris Bein HaPsorim. When was the Bris Bein HaPsorim? 30 years earlier to this incident. So it was already for 30 years that the Rebbe has promised him that he will bench him with children. So Avram, who was desperate for this inyan, could have made a cheshbon for himself. He has to be misfollowed for himself. And the Rebbe has promised him already when? 30 years ago the Rebbe promised him to help him in this. And what did Avram do? He was a tzarich lo oisei davar. And on whom did he go out to be mevakesh rachmim? He went to be mevakesh rachmim al chaveiroi and his friend. And this the Rebbe shows how one is supposed to go out of his way, what true and real, sincere Avas Yisrael is. Though one finds himself in a position, he's lacking the same thing, and he has to be mispal to the Rebbe should give him what he needs. If he knows of a friend whose friend is lacking the same minion, he puts himself aside, and for whom is he mispal to the Rebbe? He's mispal to the Rebbe for Chaverot. And this is the highest madrega of Avas Yisrael, and Achtus Yisrael, as the Rebbe keeps on stressing. This is what Avas Yisrael and Achtus Yisrael calls for, that when one is a tzorich la'isei davar, he's not mispower for himself first, but for whom is he mispower first? He's a mispower about Chaver. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also raised several questions previously in the Sedre, which the Rebbe says these are questions which obviously Rashi should have commented on it. However, for some reason Rashi passes by and does not make any comment on it. We find as the Malachim came to Lot, where did they come to? They found Lot at the gate of the door. Bishar Hayir. Whom did they speak to? They spoke to Lot. Then we find, as we look through the Psukim, Vashem himtir al Sdoim val Amoira, Hashem began pouring on what cities? On Sdoim and on Amoira. So for past 15 Psukim or so, the discussion was going on with Lot that Hashem is going to destroy which city? Sdoim. There was no mention of any other city. Constantly discussing Sdoim. All of a sudden it comes to Pasuk Chavdalet. There's mentioned another area. We are in Kapitel Yud Tes, Pasuk Chavdalet. Vashem himtir al Sdoim val Amoira, gos chisveish meis Hashem min hashemayim. Not only Sdoim was penalized, the people of Sdoim were punished, but as well the people in Amoira. Wait. We come to Pasuk Chav Hey. Vayapach, he turned over Esa'orim Ma'el, all these cities, Ve'eskol Akika, Ve'eskol Yoshvei Ha'arim, and the residents of all these cities. Which cities are we talking about? Not only Sdoim, not only Amoira, but if we will look into Rashi, Arbaton. Rashi says there are 4 cities which were turned over here by the Rebishter. Yoshvei's Besela Echad, they were all situated like one rock, and the Hof from Milmai Lolamat, and the Rebbe turned them over Milmai Lolamat. It's something which the Rebbe says, as we are learning the Psukim, question arises. It's not galactic, it's not understood that a 5-year-old is learning Chumash. First the Rebbe is giving a whole ariches that which cities he's going to destroy, and he's telling at length that he's going to destroy what city's going, and that's what the Malachim came to light. And then what city are they talking about? They don't make mention of any other area. They're talking only about Sdoim. Comes to Pasuk Chavdalet, the Rebbe mentions, Pasuk tells us, not only Sdoim, but Amoira as well. It comes to Pasuk Chav Hey, it's not only Sdoim and Amoira, but it's 2 other cities as well. And the Rebbe says the child who's learning Chumash is naturally, this question arises, and there's no interpretation given on Rashi for it. Another Shiloh which the Rebbe raised, Pasuk Chavdalet uses the expression of Hashem Hintir, and the Rebbe poured al Sdoim val Amoira, Gofris va'eish meis Hashem min hashamayim. The expression of motor, the expression of pouring, the expression motor usually refers to a pouring of rain. What does the Pasuk go on say? The Rebbe did not pour rain. Pasuk says, Rebbe poured Gofris and eish, fireworks. Pasuk should have used a different expression. Pasuk should have used an expression that's suitable for Gofris va'eish, and not an expression that's used exclusively for Mayim. The emissary is Rashi says, Hintir, Gofris va'eish, so Rashi uses the expression, Betchila motor, first it rained, and then Nase Gofris va'eish, and this rain turned into fireworks, turned into Gofris va'eish. However, it seems like the Rebbe is not satisfied just with this Pirush and Rashi. It seems that the Rebbe is learning that the word motor is an expression which applies solely to rain. And if this rain, as Rashi says here, was turned into something else, was turned into Gofris va'eish, then the Pasuk should not stick to the word motor, but Hashem Heirid or Hevi. The Rebbe brought about Gofris va'eish. Why does the Pasuk use the expression of Hashem Hintir? These are questions which the Rebbe raised, however, Rebbe remained with, the Rebbe did not answer in today's Farbrengen these questions. The Ha'oras of Zohar, commentary of Zohar, which the Rebbe learns every Farbrengen, little piece of Zohar, which has commentaries from the Rebbe's father. Very briefly, the Rebbe referred to a story which is told in today's Zohar of this week's Chazarah, that there was a city which the people in the city did not act properly, did not act accordingly. And therefore, certain Tanoim were sent to this city to see that the people in this city should do tshuva. And the people in the city did tshuva, and the Zohar concludes that the name of the city was changed. First it had one name, it slipped my mind if anybody remembers, and it was changed to Masa Machasya. Masa Machasya is a famous city which is referred to a lot in Gemara. The Rebbe also added on that Masa is written Mem Tov Aleph. Masa also, if we take the same lettering, we will get the word Emes. In other words, the people in that city became different people. I don't recall the Aramaic expression, but the title the city had before was not an expression of city. It's an expression that in Aramaic it could also be translated as a rock, as a stone. Parsha. If anybody remembers the exact expression, please mention it. I don't recall it exactly. But anyways, it comes to show us that the people in the city were turned over completely. While prior to them doing tshuva, they can be categorized as residents of Iraq. Later, the city received a new name. What was the new name? Masa Machasya. And as the word Masa itself shows us, Masa can be, we take the same letters, we get the word Emes. In other words, the people were changed completely. And as the Zohar uses the expression that they went on to such an extent that they devoted themselves solely to the learning of Torah. So this is, like in every Farbrengen, the Rebbe always refers to a little piece of Zohar that has comment from the Rebbe's father. For those that may not be familiar, the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, besides being an outstanding Gaon, tremendous Talmid Chacham, he was very, very unusual, versed in Kabbalah. And something which in these generations is something totally unusual and unseen. The Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, was at home in Kabbalah as in all other Chelkei HaTorah. And when he was sent away into far Siberia, he was sent away, he did not have many Sforim with him. There were very few Sforim which he was permitted to have with him. It was a Tanya and a set of Zohar. And every now and then, the Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe's and unseen, the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, was at home in Kabbalah as in all other Chelkei HaTorah. And when he was sent away into far Siberia, he was sent away, he did not have many Sforim with him. There were very few Sforim which he was permitted to have with him. It was a Tanya and a set of Zohar. And every now and then, the Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe Shalom, was given permission to visit her husband, to pay a visit to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak. The Russian government did not allow her to remain there constantly with him, but she was granted permission to visit him in this little shtetl where Rebbe Levi Yitzchak was every now and then. And she used to manufacture, she made handmade ink, which she would make herself. She would bring it to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, and it was with this ink that Rebbe Levi Yitzchak would write his commentary on the Zohar and on the Tanya. The Rebbe keeps on stressing in the Farbrengen, being that he was short of paper and he didn't have facilities, so he wrote extremely brief, and he did not write on any pad or on any papers. He wrote it on the Tanya and on the Zohar, which he had. In other words, it was his text of the Zohar, which all around he wrote these various comments. And in every Shabbos Farbrengen, for quite a few years, the Rebbe keeps the Zohar with him at the Farbrengen and always finds a piece that has a shaykhus to this Sedra or has some sort of a shaykhus to the Sedra. There are a few Sedras that there is no Zohar on, or there are a few Sedras which there is no commentary from his father on. But the Rebbe always finds a piece that has a shaykhus to the Sedra and interprets it, really takes it apart, and always, as the Rebbe's derech is, always finds what is the heroya, what is the lesson which we can take out of these particular things. As many times the Rebbe gets involved in a deep Kabbalah interpretation, as it's suitable when we're talking about Inyanim and Zohar. As many times it's a much lighter interpretation, it's a little bit easier. Today the Rebbe referred to basically this story which shows how the people in the city, under the influence of the Tanoim, turned themselves over completely, and while they were prior to that in the category that Tanoim had to be sent to them, where they had to be corrected and criticized for their attitude, and they had no shaykhus to Torah, they turned themselves over completely and became suitable for the name of Moshe Machasi and devoted their entire selves to the study of Torah. Throughout the Farbrengen, at the end of the Farbrengen as well, the Rebbe alerted again on the extreme importance of all of the 10 Mitzvahim to reach out to all Eden as it is suitable for the Yontif of Chanukah, which, as mentioned previously, this is the whole idea of the Yontif of Chanukah, as it shows us to reach out to Eden, to those who are still Bachutz and those who are still in the category of Murdim, they are still rebelling as far as Yiddishkeit is, to reach out to all these Eden, particularly with all the Inyanim of Mitzvahim. The Rebbe counted all of the 10 Mitzvahim, and most particularly the Ein, which also brings about Achdus Yisrael, unites Eden, and it's the Mitzvah Shazman Gromat, the call of the time, to see to it that each and every Yid should have an oath in the Sefer Torah. Next Mitzvah Shabbos we will have on Lav Malka here, at which